I was actually 16 when I was expelled. I went to school. I hacked the school website. The school headmistress said, "Who did this?" And I said, "It was me. She said, "Why?" I said, "Because I want to leave school. I want my own business."
Kirstie Whittaker is a leader in retail and manufacturing. Grew her shoes boutique at 18 years old into a thriving multi-location empire.
After overcoming a multi-million-dollar identity theft loss, she is now a legal expert in international law and arbitrations.
Today, she is guiding entrepreneurs on branding, legal strategy, and scaling their ventures.
So I went over to Vietnam and all I had was this address from Yahoo of this Vietnamese factory. And so I ended up sleeping in the factory quarters with the factory workers. I spent a good 2.5, 3 weeks there sitting on the conveyor belt learning about women's high heel shoes and how to make them. I expanded over here to America in 2014. In 2016, we had 28 pop-up stores. In 2017, my identity was stolen in Australia. I had to get rid of my factories, I had to get rid of everything just so I could pay my legal fees. My business in Australia pretty much disappeared.
You've been through so much.
You know, what was 3 years turned into 5 years. And then yes, it's all back to rebuilding now.
Welcome everyone to the ADLH Circle podcast. Here we uncover the truths behind businesses and to empower the entrepreneurial spirits with unfiltered and bold talk with innovators, creators, and founders. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, please do so before the episodes start. So here we are. Just before we start, when I did my research, did you drop out of high school?
I did. I was expelled. I'll tell you about that story.
That sounds like the start of every successful story.
There's nothing that's off bounds with me, okay? It's very transparent.
Wonderful. So, Kirsty, can you please take us back in time to the start,
Definitely.
where I started, to you back in high school, back to when you were only
Definitely.
18?
Well, I was actually 16 when I was expelled, yes, which my mum will absolutely hate me using that word. So I always had 2 passions in life. From 5 years of age, I wanted to be either a lawyer or I wanted to be a fashion designer. And that was all that I ever wanted to do. When I got to 16, I didn't come from a rich family in Australia and we had to pay for university. And I knew that my parents couldn't afford to pay for university. So I had this brainwave idea that I was going to start my own business, save the money, and then go to university. So I went to school, I hacked the school website, created my own website on these girls that were bullying me, and I redirected the school website. So this was 1999, 1998. So, you know, before the internet sort of blew up.
Yeah.
And, you know, the next day the school headmistress said, "Who did this?" And I said, "It was me. She said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I want to leave school. I want my own business." She goes, "All right, well, you're expelled." And I was so excited. I went home and I was skipping home. My mom's like, "Get in the car now." She goes, "What is this? You've been expelled." I said, "Yep, I'm going to start my own business." She goes, "How? You're not 18. I said, "Well, can't you sign the form?" She goes, "No, you're going to school." So she took me to all these school interviews. And I would swear at the headmaster so that I wouldn't be accepted. She came out, she goes, "I'm mortified with you." And I said, I wanna earn my own money. I said, I want to be able to make a name for myself. She said, "All right." She goes, "Look, you got till 5 o'clock today," which was a Friday, "to find a full-time job." She said, "And it can't be in retail and it can't be in hairdressing." So I said, "Okay." So back then we had newspapers, okay? So no online.
You mind if I ask why? What does she have against retail and?
No, it was just back in that era. You know, it was to go to university, and I would have been the first in my family to have gone to university.
Nice.
So it was a, you know, get a good education, set yourself up for life, that was the thinking back then.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found in the newspaper that the local dental surgery was looking for a dental nurse. So I walked down there and I said to them, I said, it's my life ambition to be a dentist. And the dental nurse goes, oh, you went to the local private school? I said, yes, I did. I said, and I want to be a dentist, but I want hands-on experience. She goes, okay. She goes, well, the job's yours. Start Monday. So I went home and my mum's looking at me. She goes, don't you think you should be job hunting? She goes, otherwise you're going back to school on Monday. I said, I got a job. She goes, doing what? And I said, I'm going to be a dental nurse. She goes, but you hate the sight of blood. Doesn't matter. So with that, I stuck to my job. I was allowed to also work retail on my weekends, which I did. So I worked 2 to 3 jobs and I saved my money up till I was 18. And then I opened up my first retail store in my local area, which was before online. So
how much did it cost you to open that retail store back then?
Back then I saved $1,500. Yeah, which was my rent because I did a casual monthly lease, and the store was so big. It was huge. And I didn't have enough money for stock. I only had a little tiny little bit of stock. And it looked so empty back then, but I just literally, I worked so hard. And then I thought, all right, well, I've got this one shop. I want a second shop. So I thought, okay, well, the bank's not going to lend me money. How am I going to get this money? And that was then when I knew that I had I knew about law. And so I rang up a recruitment agency and I said, you know, look, I see these temporary government jobs and they're paying really well. You know, what are the chances? And she goes, oh, sure. She goes, look, you know, entry level, easy. So I went in and I started and I was earning really good money, which that money then was what I was putting back into my shop. So one shop grew into 2 shops, which grew into 3, which then I was like, oh, okay, well, what do I want to do now? And I was like, I actually want to manufacture. So then I took myself off to Vietnam, which I didn't know anyone. Yes, my uncle does live over there, but nobody actually knew I was going over there because I wanted to do this on my own. So I went over to Vietnam and all I had was this address from Yahoo of this Vietnamese factory. First taxi wouldn't take me to the address because it was too far out from the airport, from Ho Chi Minh. Second taxi took me out there. I had my suitcase and I got to the factory and no one could speak English and I couldn't speak Vietnamese. They didn't know I was coming. And so we're standing there and I've literally got like a pair of shoes. I'm like, teach me. And I'm pulling it apart. I'm like, teach me.
In all sign language?
And we ended up, like, after a few hours, we ended up getting to it. And, you know, they're showing me around. And then it literally was like, well, where are you going to sleep? And so I ended up sleeping in the factory quarters with the factory workers. And I spent a good 2.5, 3 weeks there sitting on the conveyor belt learning about women's high heel shoes and how to make them. Beefsteak was what I was eating a lot of with bread and everything else.
Yeah.
And I got food poisoning really bad from the water. But, you know, it was fun. And then I heard about the Canton Fair. And so I took myself over to Canton Fair. And that was then when I really saw manufacturing at its prime. And I'm sitting outside of these booths in Canton Fair. And, you know, I got a jacket made to go there because I thought I had to dress up and look all this professional.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sitting outside and I'm just listening to what people were ordering. And people were ordering, you know, like $200,000 worth of stock or, you know, $15,000 worth of stock. And I'm going, that is a lot. And so I'm taking note of the questions that they're asking, like minimum order quantity, you know, minimum sizes, colors, things like that, materials. And then a couple of days later, I thought, I'm going to try this on my own. So I went into the first booth and I said, oh, so what's your minimum order quantity? And the factory worker just started talking to me. And I said, oh, is that per color, per size, you know, and all these other things. And that was where it started sort of taking off. And I was like, I want my own factory.
Were the numbers intimidating to you?
Yes and no. It was such an eye-opener because Australia is so small, you know, and what I thought was really big sales in Australia was nothing compared to what I was seeing. I said to this one gentleman who ordered $200,000 worth of shoes, He came from the UAE. And I said to him, I said, that stock must last you years. And he said to me, no, this will last me a month.
Oh.
It's like, what? That is insane. So that was then when I was like, all right, I can do this. I can manufacture, this will be fine. And then, I went back home to Australia and I worked out all of my figures on how much I needed. And at that point, I did ask my uncle and his workers. I was like, so what do I need for this? How can I do that? And I did know one of the factory workers. So I got a translator and I said, look, how can I do this? And the first factory, it was literally a 2-car garage. It was nothing fancy or flash. And, we got secondhand machinery, bits and pieces. And then that was when, the time when I was in Australia, I was critiquing my craft as well and learning more about shoe manufacturing. And then, taking it back over there and working with one of the factory workers into what became our little factory at the time. So, it was nothing flash. It was just very basic. I've got this one photo where our stools were taped together because we didn't have a lot of money to invest into a big flashy factory, but I knew what I wanted. I knew how to get the orders, and from that point is where it sort of took off.
Beautiful. So right now, when you look back at that time, how do you feel about in retrospect to that?
I love it. I honestly cherish it. I feel so much love for that experience that if I could do anything in life and money didn't have to be an issue, I would be still sitting in that factory right now today that I built making shoes. There's just that passion in there. It's about working. Everyone was like a family together, the laughs that we had. And most people couldn't speak English. I couldn't speak Vietnamese, but it was a family. And I don't know, there's just something that is so unexplainable, but there's just something there that, I love and I'll never forget and I want to go back to.
I love that. It's like when you have such a passion for the craft of it, in that moment, does it feel like you got transferred to a different space? It's you don't have to worry about all the difficulties of business.
100%. It's like nothing else in the world matters except for the fact that you make this shoe and you've got this raw material, you've got this idea, and then you start cutting and sewing and putting it together, and then you see the finished object. It's like there's nothing else in the world that exists except for the fact that you're making the shoe and then you see it all come together and it's like perfection.
And I know you love your product. Then when you receive the feedback from your customers, how do you respond to that initially? And how do you evolve ever since?
I love it. The best thing about that is when you see somebody wearing your shoes and they send you the photo, like a prom or a wedding or something like that, and they're saying about how much that pair of shoes made their day, that's incredible. It's incredible to know that something that you made by hand could bring so much joy to somebody on their special day and contribute to that. Look, I get people that don't like my shoes. The heel height is too high or the material wasn't comfortable. Everyone's feet with footwear is different. And that's even clothes, sizes, different body shapes. I take it on board, and that's something that I do look at every time when I do manufacture is, okay, well, is there a market where, a particular width could be used, or I could do something a little bit different? So my mind's constantly thinking about, how can I actually make this better for the customers? What's something that's missing in the market that I can expand to? So it's definitely something, feedback, good or bad, it's definitely something that I take into consideration.
I see. As my mentor, I'd love to ask Kirsty what she thinks about our product at ADLH.
I love them. The amount of stretch that is in this material, for somebody like me who doesn't really have much body shape, I'm just straight up and down. The amount of stretch that goes into this material is amazing. It's so soft, it's so comfortable. And the other best thing too about it is I have broad shoulders. I can actually move my arms. Most jackets that I find, I can't move. This is just amazing. It's so comfortable.
Thank you so much,
That's
Kirsty.
okay. My
It's
pleasure.
a pleasure to have you on the show
Thank
with
you.
us. I'm sure that her story is going to inspire so many people, and especially for me, whenever there's hard times, I know it's so small comparing to what Kirsty have been through. So afterwards, you started manufacturing shoes in Vietnam, and I know that you started expanding and invest into the factory, and then you built the team and owned it. Can you tell me a little bit more about that journey from just learning how to make a pair of shoes into owning the whole factory and then securing it as part of your
Definitely.
supply chain?
It was look, it was definitely interesting. I was very lucky because a lot of the people that worked with me knew shoes and they had that background and that expertise and knowledge. My factory in Vietnam, I didn't keep for very long. We did a couple of different runs. When I say runs, productions, and then I ended up selling it to somebody who actually worked with me. And then I went and invested into a Chinese factory, which I co-owned. And that was, because of the financial crisis that had sort of happened and just expansion that I needed to expand a little bit bigger. But building the team, it was amazing. You find people that might not necessarily have the experience of making shoes, but they have other experiences which can contribute to the manufacturing of shoes. So for example, somebody might be really good with their hands and doing woodwork. I know that sounds very wild, but somebody who's good with carpentry can actually be really good at making shoes because it's all about the assembly and it's about the attention to detail and all those other little bits that go together with it. So, we had staff that we had grown there. When I was there, it was only a staff of 10, so it wasn't huge or anything like that. But yeah, it was staff that didn't necessarily all have the same background, but we all came together and we made it work. The machinery, when I got the machinery, a lot of the machinery when I bought it was secondhand or broken. And that was then when, certain staff members, when I had them there, they could actually fix it for me, which was fantastic because they had that skill and that background. So yes, building the team, it was quite unique. I did have to rely on having somebody there who could speak the language as well, and that knew all about the employment laws and all about wages, because that was one thing that I definitely didn't know about. So I definitely needed the help with that. But, I'm not going to say that it was very easy, but I'm not going to say that it was extremely difficult, that I'd never do it again. I definitely would do it again. And it's something I'm looking at right now.
And then afterwards, once you are able to produce your own stocks, how's business in Australia?
So business in Australia is a lot smaller, and it's not as big. So I'm not sure if you know about my stolen identity issue in Australia.
Can you tell us more about that?
I will. Yeah. So I expanded over here to America in 2014. In 2016, we had 28 pop-up stores that we were operating out of. And when I say we, a bunch of friends and I went into together. In 2017, my identity was stolen in Australia by somebody who, because I own my own trademarks and my brands, this person had started a website and a business name identical to my trademarks. This person then tried to start passing themselves off as being me and my brand. Because of how they were promoting it, there was a lot of damage that was done to my name. So in Australia, my sales did drop off and I did lose a lot of business because of the damage that was being done. I left America at that point, went back to Australia to figure out what was going on because I was getting orders that were being cancelled and people were saying, we've placed orders with you, we've paid you, where is everything? And I've gone, you haven't placed any orders. The Australian government sent me a letter saying, we have been informed that you are running on a deregistered business. I said, no, I'm not. I said, I'm running out of my US company. I said, it's registered in the US. No, they said, we have been informed, we've got invoices. What this person had done was they had set up an account on Alibaba. They had claimed it was me, didn't have the right address, sent themselves invoices, then sent it to the government and said it was me. they basically were trying to steal my business, and they were trying to steal my brand name. So for 3 years, I had to fight that. I had to fight a lot with issues around, sorry, I'm going to cry because it was such a big issue for me. Basically, that person then tried to sue me for defamation, saying that they owned my brand. I was defaming them. You know, this wasn't really my brand. I was in America. What was going on? So yeah, 3 years we fought it. I went to an event in Australia, which was run by Border Force at the time. Jimmy Chu was there. Michael Kors' legal teams were all there. And I was talking about it, and I said, look, I said, I've spent $1 million trying to legally fight this. I said, and I'm running low. I said, the Australian Taxation Office is after me. I said, you know, Australian Securities Commission is after me. I'm being fined for this. I haven't done it. I don't know how much more I can prove that this wasn't me. And one of the lawyers there said to me, they said, well, do you know what you want to do on how you're going to fight this? And I said, look, I have no money. I said, I am broke. I had to get rid of my factories. I had to get rid of everything just so I could pay my legal fees. I said, but from what I've done, I said, and from what I've seen, there's this thing called WIPO, which is where I can take away the websites that this person is operating off. I said, where they're damaging my trade name. I said, if I can at least take those websites down, at least then maybe I can recover my business. I said, and maybe this person will go away. And they said, that's a good plan. They said, let's do it. And I said, I don't have the money to hire you. I said, you're far too expensive. You represent, all these large brands. They said, don't worry about it. They said, you have gone through hell and back. They said, and you had something so big. They said, we want to see you get back to this. So they did all of the legal work for me basically for free, which I'm so forever grateful to them. We went to court. It was through arbitration, and it was done and dusted, and I won. This person then took me to court in Australia for stalking and tried to put a restraining order on me, which then meant that in Australia that if I was convicted of stalking, which I wasn't, but if I was convicted of stalking, I actually most likely would have gone to jail and I would have lost everything again. I sat there, I had to get a criminal lawyer at that point, and I sat there and I said to this criminal lawyer, I got off the train, and I sat there and I said to this criminal lawyer, if I've done everything right in my life, I said, I built everything. I said, I pay my taxes. I said, I have so much passion for everything that I've built. I said, and then somebody can come along, take photos, claim that my factories were their factories, claim that my business was their business. I said, and put all of these false reports in to the government that I had to fight for 3 years. I had my visas suspended for all my countries. I said, I had to fight that for 3 years. I said, and then they can accuse me of stalking. I said, when I haven't ever had contact with this person, it was all through legal. They said, yes. They said, you have to go to court. That is the court system. And so I said, okay. I said, well, I'm not coming over to the other side of the country, so can you represent me and go? They went to the first hearing, and they said to this person, they said, what do you want? And this person said, I want to see your client here in person. And they said, that's not going to happen. They said, what do you want? And the judge said to this person, look, if this is a false case, I will award Kirsty the maximum penalty that she is entitled to. My lawyer sat there, and my lawyer says to me on the phone, he said, Kirsty, he said, look, is there anything? I said, no. And he said, I'm telling you now, Kirsty. He said, this is a really serious accusation that she's brought forward. They said, if there is anything there where you have contacted this person or written anything, they said, and the judge finds you, guilty for this, they said, you will lose everything. You will lose your passport. You will lose your businesses. You will lose your consulting business with government. They said, you will lose your right to practice law. And Quan, I'm telling you now, I had just gotten off the train.
And so, sorry, just so I fully understand your story, what's the timeline on that? How long was the whole process since you said 2017 was when they started doing damage to your business?
This was end of 2019. This was October 2019. I just got off the train and I broke down and I went to jump in front of the train that was coming, because I said to my lawyer, I said, how is it possible that I worked everything and did everything right, and this is what could possibly be happening to me? And he just said to me, he said, are you okay? I said, no, I'm not. And I hung up the phone. And the person at the train station who was working at the station had seen me on the security cameras and ran out and grabbed me. This person who brought this case against me that caused me all these problems dropped the case 4 days before the hearing and disappeared for 5 years, and has just started to come back again to try it again. So my business in Australia pretty much disappeared, and it took a lot for me to get my clients' trust back again. So my business is quite small out there. Sorry, I don't need to cry.
You've been through so much.
To sacrifice everything as a kid, have yourself expelled from school, to work 3 jobs to open a store, to then go to another country, build a factory, and work so hard. This is what I don't think a lot of people understand, the dedication in this industry. I would work in my factory on weekends, and then Monday morning I'd fly back to Australia. I'd go work in government jobs, in contracting. Friday night I'd fly back out to Vietnam. Saturday, Sunday, I'd pretty much work nearly 24 hours straight and then fly back every weekend to build this. To build it all up, to put so much blood, sweat, and tears into it, then to have this identity crisis happen. And for 3 years, you have to fight it, and no one wants to help you. And you're innocent. For 3 years, that takes a big hit from your business and everything. And then COVID had happened. So, what was 3 years turned into 5 years. And then, yes, it's all back to rebuilding now. Sorry, I don't mean to cry.
And did you just say the person is showing up again?
Yes, so the person has started a very similar trademark again and a very similar name, just a slight difference, which was a variation that they had tried at the same time. Another big fashion designer has actually tried to stop them this time. So we're all quite aware of this, and this person had tried to do it to another company again in the meantime. But yeah, they've tried it again, which I said to my legal team end of last year, I said, why would this person vanish for 5 years and then all of a sudden come back again?
So you transitioned from a fashion designer, having your own factory, and this terrible incident happened to you, and you decided to fight back, and you transitioned to law.
Yes.
Can you walk us through your process of learning along the way, just like that, just like how you were when you were 18? Problems show up, but you solve every single one of them along the way. And how is your expertise in law helping you right now? How are you fighting back?
So what had happened during that time, one of the biggest things that I noticed was I went through several lawyers, because the lawyers, when I was back in Australia, didn't understand international law. And the most common thing that a lawyer would say to me was, well, how hard is it to start a fashion brand? Just rename, just file bankruptcy, restart again. When you've done 20 years at that point of building something, you can't just restart. It's not that simple. So I went through lawyer after lawyer after lawyer until I could find somebody who actually understood international. it was at that point when I realized that if I'm doing this, there's other people that are out there that are fighting, different cases who are international as well. If I'm going through this, then they must be as well. So I noticed that there was a gap. There was a big gap in having somebody who understood international laws, that actually understood small businesses, and that understood fashion and retail and manufacturing and international trade. So what had happened was, when I was going through this, I needed a distraction. And my distraction was to go to university, which I'd always wanted to study law. And I thought, why not? I can do this now. So I applied with one of the local universities in Queensland, and I was accepted into my Masters of International Trade based off my work experience and also my experience in trade. I did my Masters of International Law. And that was then when I learned about arbitration, I learned about dispute resolution and cross-border transactions. I never had intended to do my law degree, but as I went through that case, and as people shared their cases with me as well, I learned that this was actually quite frequent. It was common. People weren't quite understanding that as small business, for example, if you do business with a Chinese factory, a lot of people think, well, if the container doesn't work out, I lose my money, which isn't actually true. There are certain elements there that you can pop into a contract with any factory you deal with across any country, and you can actually get a resolution if things don't work out. Small businesses aren't told this, and they're not educated around, the right way forward. Bigger businesses and bigger manufacturing, they know it because they have the powerhouse of lawyers behind them. Small businesses don't have that luxury. So as I was going through this, I realized there was more and more people that were having issues that, just really needed somebody on their side. After I did my Masters, I took a little bit of a break, and I thought, you know what, it's COVID. I'm stuck in Australia anyway as well. Why not do my Juris Doctor? So I did my Juris Doctor during lockdown, which was another interesting twist and turn, but it was never actually to practice local law in Australia. It was always there so that I could learn and understand more about international law and more about how I can educate businesses and mentor businesses to be able to do that expansion. I became an international arbitrator to represent the fashion and retail industries. Now, in arbitration, there's a lot of arbitration around international trade, construction, or resources, but there's not a lot of arbitrators that specialize around retail or fashion or textiles. So that's where I was hoping to fill the gap in that and to learn. The whole purpose of me doing this degree was, one, to educate myself while I was going through my situation, and so I could instruct my legal team better, but also two, then I can actually now go out and teach other businesses how to better represent themselves, but how to better protect themselves.
Wonderful.
So I am hoping to sit the New York bar, fingers crossed, next year. So then I'll be licensed in America and Australia.
Now, looking back at your long journey of entrepreneurship, you have always had that in you since you were 16. You never try to fit yourself into a mold that someone put out there, but you want to be your own boss and build your own thing, fight against anything that comes your way. How are you feeling?
Do you know, I tried to put myself many a times into a square box, but I was a round peg. And, when you go through life as an entrepreneur, you often do think, and I say this from my perspective, there are many times where I'd look at my sister and I'd say, why couldn't I just be like you and have, a successful career in the same one job and, that 9 to 5. And she would look at me and she goes, Kirsty, she said, you would be too bored. I said to her, but I wish I could be like you. Being an entrepreneur, it's something that's inside of you. You don't ever want to let go. You want to fight. You have that burning fight to not to be better, but to be better for yourself, to be the better person than what you were yesterday. You know, whether that's making a difference to somebody else's life through giving them jobs, or, you know, helping out a family, or bringing them an amazing product. You want to be a better version of yourself than what you were the day before. Being an entrepreneur, I've never looked at it as that. It's always just been built into me. It's just been me and what I've always done, things that I've wanted to do for me, not because I've wanted to keep up with somebody else or because I'm expected to do it. It's what makes me happy. And at the end of the day, you know, I tell a lot of people this, you know, if Kim Kardashian, I admire her. I think she's an amazing businesswoman. But if Kim Kardashian, they built themselves up from a regular family into the mountain house that she is right now. If she can do it, then I can do it. It doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter what your situation is. You know, you can be that dream. Just dream, work for it. You can do it. So that's my only words of advice to any entrepreneur out there is dream those big dreams. Work for them. Don't let anyone tell you no. And don't let anything stand in your way.
Sometimes when business is so hard, I also think about the other path, the other blue pill, right? And I think, what if I take just a regular job? It would be so much easier. I don't have to earn so much revenue in order just to get a living wage.
Yes. And it's hard, isn't it? Like, the sleepless nights we have, I can tell you now.
Yeah. But then I started to think about the truth behind it. If I'm working a regular job, I'm also putting my fate into the hands of those more successful entrepreneurs who are at the forefront of it all, dealing with, let's say, the state of the world right now, where everything is so uncertain. And if they fail, I go down with them as well. But with the entrepreneurial spirits
You're
that
in
you
charge.
had.
See, that was the one thing I always struggled with, you know, being younger, was I could never understand how you go to work and you're told what you're going to be paid. But you work harder and you know, like you put in a lot of effort in that. And at the end of the day, you come home with this check that somebody else has determined this is what you're going to earn. And I struggled with that because I thought, no, I want to determine how much I'm going to earn each week. I want to set that. I want to, you know, like know that the extra hours that I put in was worth it. So I did struggle a lot with that, and I don't mean that in any disrespects to anyone who has a full-time job, because it is easier. Well, you know, like sitting on this side, you say it's going to be easier, but then I'm pretty sure other people on the other side are like, actually, it wasn't that much easier. Both have the pros and cons, but definitely, you know, as an entrepreneur, you always do that questioning of, should I have just worked for somebody? Should I go out and get another job? Should I go do this? Should I do that? That's part of being an entrepreneur. That's normal. How are you finding it at the moment?
It is very difficult. I don't know. I haven't worked being an entrepreneur for long enough through different eras and time to know if there's easier time than now or whenever. But I feel like it's always difficult. There's always going to be problems, especially hearing your story. It could feel so unfair sometimes, but who is there going to save you other than yourself?
That's exactly right. Nobody's going to come save you. You have to be responsible for yourself. You have to save yourself. And that was, you know, that was one of the biggest things that really scared me when I lost my identity and went through that case was, what do I have to fall back on? What am I going to do? No one's going to hire me. I make shoes. You know, I didn't have a degree behind me. I didn't have another skill set. And in Australia, nobody makes shoes. So what did I have to fall back on? So that's why I had to save myself. That's why I did do the degree, you know, as my backup plan if anything was to happen. That was one of the toughest situations I've ever been through, to know that you've built this business and it basically disappears overnight. That's really difficult. I've been through the 2008 financial economy crisis. I've been through other crises that have happened around the world as you do business. Yes, at the time they're very difficult, but I've been very good at being able to pivot. And as an entrepreneur that deals internationally, you would understand this. You look at the markets everywhere. You're constantly looking, going, okay, well, there's a financial crisis in America at the moment. However, in Asia's markets are trading a little bit stronger, so I'll pivot my business over and target more Asia and Europe while America is going through this, which is what I did in 2008. I just pivoted and retargeted. I targeted Australia a lot more, wherever there was a stronger economy. What we're going through now, this year, is a lot different to anything I've been through before. And even with COVID, so I was working in government in COVID for the Commonwealth, and I never thought I would go through another situation like COVID. When I was working in government doing consulting, this wasn't with my fashion business, this was consulting, we were on the ground 24 hours a day. We were getting phone calls in the middle of the night. The unexpected was happening. We couldn't predict what was going to happen. When that sort of came to an end, never thought I'd go through a situation again. And then tariffs came. And I'm telling you right now, I have never had such high anxiety, especially to rebuilding my business and looking at manufacturing. I have never had such high anxiety like I do right now, going, what's going to happen tomorrow? Am I going to have a business tomorrow? Am I going to have a new tariff tomorrow? Do I need to have a new pricing schedule? It is really difficult right now. I've been telling a lot of entrepreneurs that if you can buckle down and if you can really just push through this, you will be able to achieve anything, because this to me is one of the most difficult times in business right now.
And I think that it's so empowering in your journey, that since you're dealing with so many problems and then you evolve. Like, I feel like Kirsty at this moment is so much different and way bigger than herself when she was being rebellious back in high school.
So much so. Do you know, like, back then, I honestly, because we didn't have online shopping, and back then you had a retail store and that was your region. You couldn't sell outside your region, and you had to put newspaper articles. I honestly thought life was I'd have one shop, I'd have my white little picket fence, I'd get married, and that was going to be my life. Like, that is what I thought it was. When I look back at it and then go, okay, well then, twists and turns happened, and I went into manufacturing. And then even when I got to America and I was doing these pop-up shops, I thought that was it. Like, that was my biggest goal. I thought, life couldn't get any better. And then I had that issue. Now I look back at it and I'm like, I have changed so much. I have got a whole different strategy to my business. I'm more in tune with my business. And there was things there in my business at the time I actually wanted to change. And when sometimes you go, oh, that's a bit too difficult at the moment, I'll change it later. That incident happening is actually what forced me to change a few things in my business. So I think that incident happening, look, positives come out of every bad situation. I'm not going to sit there and go, oh my goodness, doom and gloom. There's always positives. And I'm always appreciative for every situation that I go through, because it's what makes me stronger, and it makes me, achieve the next achievement that I never thought that I was going to achieve, or I never dreamt of. So there's positives out of everything. And, this situation at the moment with tariffs, I'm sure there's going to be a positive, okay? I want to believe that there's going to be a positive. But if anything, I think my whole journey has given me a leverage right now where I can stand up for small businesses. I can stand up for entrepreneurs. I've got the background with international trade now. I've got the laws behind me that being a lawyer, but I've also been in the situation, and I am in the situation of manufacturing. So I feel like I can be that stronger voice now. for entrepreneurs. And I never thought that would have been me back at 16. Although I was always a person that you couldn't tell me something could be done this way. I would be like, no, it can't be done this way. I'll show you. I'd always find another way to do something.
That's fantastic. That's how great products are built, and everything is put on its head. And with all the innovations right now, with AI and how innovators and game changers like Kirsty are able to build businesses and find innovations that are more suitable to customers. Perfect. Kirsty, thank you so much for sharing with us today your journey, going through it all, starting from when you were 16, going through good times, learning things, and losing it all, going through such difficult times. Rebuilding. And through it all, we see resilience. Resilience. Just keep going at it. She never gives up.
Thank you so much for having me. I've appreciated it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kirsty.
Thank you.